Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.dev, and here we have another video in our Intro to React 2024 video series. And here we're going to start introducing the idea of state. So we introduced props in the previous video, which is data that's basically the components we're seeing from the outside. So it's usually the parent component who's giving this data. So the idea is that that component really has no idea what that data is going to be ahead of time because it doesn't come from it itself. Okay. Now, state is generally going to be a variable that is internal to the component that may change. Okay, and what's important about that is that when this particular type of variable changes, is that it's going to trigger an update. So to understand this, we need to talk about how React handles updates to the DOM. Okay, so typically if you ever use jQuery or just plain vanilla JavaScript, what would you have to do? Okay, if something changed and you wanted to change it in the DOM, you would have to go grab those individual DOM elements, change their inner text or inner HTML properties, and then surgically rebuild the DOM. Okay, the idea behind React is to kind of make it where you don't need to do that. That's what we mean by React. Okay, things change and React will rebuild the DOM for you. And to do this, what it does, it uses something called a virtual DOM. And essentially what it's doing is behind the scenes, it is creating a virtual copy of the DOM in memory. Okay, and every time something changes, particularly state, it's going to trigger an update, which means it's going to rebuild that virtual DOM. Then it's going to compare that virtual DOM to the real DOM and determine, hey, which nodes are different, like which ones now have any sort of difference in their properties. And if there is a difference, it will then rebuild or make those surgical changes, okay, but only those changes. So for example, here you have a component tree. Okay, so you have components, and then those components have children, and then those children have children. Okay, so now imagine that we have a variable that's considered state in this component. Again, how state works, we'll see that in a second, but the idea is just know that there is state in this component, and it has changed. So what that does, it tells React that, hey, it's time for you to update. So what it does to update is that it starts with that component. And then it's going to rerun that component, which means it'll rerun all the child functions, all the child components, and then replace that part of its virtual DOM. Okay, and then it'll do the comparison with the real DOM to rebuild what you see on the screen. And the logic that it takes is that once it triggers the update, it says, okay, well, this component is updating. Let me see what the result of this one is. Okay, did the state or props change in this component from the last time we ran this component? If it didn't, okay, then no, we can stop here. Okay, so in that case, we don't need to go any further down. I mean, it'll still reevaluate, say, okay, hey, did the state here change or props change here? No, okay, no need to change it. Did the state or props change here? Nope. And then it won't bother re-rendering those. Then it's going to go over here and say, okay, did the state or props change here? No, no, no. And then it wouldn't re-render any of that. But again, it starts from here. Now, what if the state in this component changed? Well, then it would only evaluate these three components. So it would say, okay, did this change? Did this change? Did this change? And if the state changed in this component, well, it has no children, so it would just reevaluate that component and not move any further. So, and the reason I'm pointing this out is to understand sort of how state changes work. Because again, a lot of people are tempted to do is they put all their state in the app component, and then they just pass it down because it's easy. I don't have to think about it. Okay. The problem with doing that is that every time state changes, then the whole component tree is being re-rendered. Okay. So, which at a small scale, again, when you're learning React and you're just trying things out, it's not going to make much difference performance-wise. But imagine as your application becomes bigger and more complicated, working with larger amounts of data, those performance changes can cause a lag in what you see on the screen. Okay, and we want people to have a good user experience, a nice, crisp, reactive. So generally, good practice is to try to keep your state as local as possible. I'd rather have more of my state at this level than more of my state at this level. Generally, at the application level, you just want state that's going to be used everywhere. Like, hey, color settings, things like that, things that matter everywhere. Cool. Another thing is, an important part of React is making things reusable. So that way you can reuse components. Okay, the problem is that if a component is handling state and the logic to display, well, then that component is like tied to that state. So that component can never really be reused with anything other than displaying that specific stateful logic. Okay, so in that case, if you have something that's going to have a similar display but different logic, it's going to have to be a different component. So you reduce the reusability. So a good pattern is to take the logic of what is the state and how you change the state, you put that in one component, and then that component would pass that state to a stateless component, a component that does not have state, that's just in charge of displaying the content. So that way this can be reusable, and this doesn't have to be, you end up rewriting less code. Okay. Cool. So now let's actually see this in action. So let me go bring up VS Code. So I'll move this over to the side. Again, I'm going to start out of here from 3, and I have my sample code there in 3. So I'm going to just close all this, and I'm going to open this up in the terminal. Open this up in the browser. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a counter component. Okay, so there's my app component that just loads up that hello world. And we're going to create a counter component. Okay. And now, by default, I'm just going to always put props when I write my components. Just good practice. Until you feel really comfortable in knowing when to do it and when not to do it. Okay. And what we're going to do is that this component is going to have a variable. And we want this variable to change, so we're going to say let count. Okay, we're going to have a variable called count that equals 0. Okay, so because we want that to go up. We're going to have a function that changes that count. So we're going to say const add 1 equals, okay, and then basically it's going to be a function that all it does is just take the count and adds 1 to it. So there's that function. Okay, and actually what I'm going to want to do, actually I do want to do a little bit more in that function, so let me add some curly brackets. Okay, I'm also going to want to console log the value of count as we change it. Okay, and we'll just say count. Okay, so that'll console log the value of count so we can see that. Cool, so I have a variable that tracks what I think is my state and a function to change that state. So far sounds good, because usually state is just any variable that sort of like is a constant thing that you're going to refer to that affects the behavior of your app. In React, what is state is going to be defined a little bit more specifically, as you'll see. And then what I'm going to return is I'm going to return a div. And in that div, we're going to have an h1 that displays the count. And the button that if you click will add 1 to the count. Now, how do I do that? How do I attach that function to this button? Well, in normal HTML, I would normally be able to put like an onClick property and then in a string, write some JavaScript and say, okay, hey, run this JavaScript every time you click on this button. Okay, but in JSX, the way it works is that these are camel case. So instead of onClick with a lowercase c, it's onClick with an uppercase c. And then what you do is you use the curly brackets for JSX to interpolate, JavaScript values and say, hey, when this thing clicks, what I want you to do is run this function. So that's how you attach events to things. You say, okay, hey, when this event occurs on this event, run this function. Okay, otherwise it's a normal event, so you can it still receives the event object theoretically, and all the other stuff you might have learned about events when working with just plain JavaScript. Okay, and again, if you haven't worked with the DOM using just plain JavaScript or jQuery, I'd recommend you do that first. You'll appreciate a lot more what React does for you and why it does it for you, having that experience and that knowledge. Again, you want to build up your foundations before you just kind of go hog wild with React. Too many people rush and they find themselves, they grow slower for it. Okay. So, okay, here we go. Button. Okay, so now we have right now this, I don't see it because again, what we're rendering on the screen is the app component. So that means I need this counter component to be in somewhere inside an app. So I'm going to replace that with counter. Okay, and now we see it. So we see 0 click. Okay. Now if I click the button, it doesn't change. That's weird. I thought you said Alex. I thought you said React was reactive. It should be reacting, shouldn't it? Well, let me take a look at my console. There's this console log there. I do see the console log, and the number is going up every time I click it. The number is going up. So why isn't it reflecting on the screen? because React doesn't know it needs to update the DOM. Okay, the way React works is that you actually have to tell it to update the DOM. It'll do it. It'll do all the updates. It'll do all the granular stuff, but it needs to know when. So in this case, just a normal let variable that can change isn't good enough. Okay, so React has a function, and there's several of these functions that are called hooks. They always start with the word use, like use state, use context, use reducer, use ref. There's going to be all these use functions that exist inside of React that allow you to give your components superpowers. One of these superpowers is going to be state. So basically, in order for me to make this variable state, the syntax is going to be, okay, you're going to put a array here. So you're going to say let. Actually, you don't even need to do let. You can just do const. And you're going to say an array. The reason being is because the function we're going to use returns an array. So what we're going to do is break apart that array into two pieces. One being our variable, count. And then the second thing being a function that allows us to update the count, set count. And the function we're going to use is called react.useState. And then this function takes in one argument, which is what is the value of that state in the beginning? In this case, 0. Okay, so essentially the first time this function is run, the value of this is going to be 0. And then anytime we want to change it, we use this set count function. Okay, which will then go through that's what tells React to do the update. So if I don't use set count, then React doesn't know that I want an update. But with that, I have to change this. I'm getting all these errors because count isn't what it was before. So in this case, I'm going to get rid of this line. What we would rather do, I don't want to change count directly. You never change the state variables directly. So if I know that this variable state, because I used use state, well, then the way I want to change is by using the set count function. So I would say, hey, set count. And then I can either pass the new value directly and I can say, hey, this equals count plus equals 1. That would be fine. Okay, but if I click really fast, I might get some unintended results. So oftentimes best practice is what you do is you pass in an arrow function. Okay, and this function receives the old state. Okay, so you always get the old value of that state. So the old count. Okay, and then I can return the new value, which is just going to be the old count plus 1. Okay, I could do that, and then that would work just fine. Okay, and that's probably going to be best practice for something like this. Okay, so what this does is that when I click this button, the set count is going to run this callback or this function and say, okay, well, you know, we're going to return old count plus 1. That gets passed as set count, and that kicks off the whole update process. So now a update gets queued to React, and then it goes through that whole DOM tree to see what needs to be updated and what doesn't. Just so you can see it in action, if I go to the Elements tab of my over here, and I'm going to go bring up the HTML so you can see it. So let's go div, and there's the H1 with a counter. So keep an eye on that. So if I click on the button, see now it's counting. So now it's going up to 2 to 3, and you see the little flashes. See the only thing that's, because basically when you see that, anything that changes flashes. So you notice that only the H1 is flashing, because React using the virtual DOM is able to determine that that's really the only thing that changed and only updates that. Okay, so it does these surgical updates. Okay, but I see it up here too. I can see it visually changing because now React knows to update the DOM. Because when I use set count, again, it sends that little message to React that, hey, it's time for you to do this virtual DOM comparison thing that we mentioned earlier. Okay, so just remember that, like, if the variable is going to affect what you see on the screen, you're going to want to make sure that you use useState to define that variable and make sure you always update that variable using the set function. Okay, now let me show you a quick sort of mistake a lot of people make. So in this case, instead of count, okay, being a number, let's say that count is really a object that has a value of 0. Okay, so it has a value of 0. Okay, now, okay, so it's like, okay, that's fine. But what if I did this? I want to set count, and basically what we do is we say set count, and then we set the new, well, actually, no, that would actually work. What we do first is we update the count. So I say, hey, count dot value plus equals 1, and then I pass the count, the updated count object, as the as the new state. Okay, so if I do this, watch what happens. Okay, let me see. Is this still erroring? Yeah, because I need to do like count.value over here. Okay, so there we see the button again. So now let's go to the console. Now let me click and see once again, even though I am using the set count function, notice it's not changing. The value is updating. You can see that in the console logs. It is going up, but the screen is not changing. The reason being is that the way React does it, it compares the value that you pass the set count between the old value. So even though the value property in the object is different, the object is still the same object. Okay, it's kind of like if I get a new couch, doesn't mean my house changed. Just because the thing the couch is in, or just because something inside my house is different, doesn't mean my house is a different house. And the same thing here, just because the value that's inside of the object has changed doesn't mean it's a different object. So in that case, React thinks that you're just giving it the same state, and to prevent you from doing unneeded renders, it's just going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't need to rebuild the DOM because you didn't give me a new value. Okay? So how would I avoid this mistake? Okay, so again, this is going to be a problem with objects and arrays, or really any kind of object. You need to pass it a new value. So that means it can be a different couch, but the different couch has to be in a new house. So in that case, what you'd want to do is you'd want to create and set count here. I would create a new object. So I use a fresh set of curly brackets that has a value property, and then that value property can be, count.value plus 1. Okay. I could do it that way. Or if I wanted to do it in the callback style, I could say old count, and then we return, okay, an object that has a value property that equals the old count dot value plus 1. And then this would work. Okay, I'm just returning a new object. See, it's a new set of curly brackets. So I'm returning a whole new object. It's not the same as the old object that has a increased value. So now if I do that, I can hit click and see now it changes again. And we're good to go. Okay, so just keep that in mind, because a lot of times what happens is that in certain things, you'll have like big long arrays as your state, or a big object as your state. Let's keep in mind that to trigger the whole update, you need to make sure that it's a new object, new array. Taking the old array or old object and changing the values inside of it is not the same thing as a new array or a new object in JavaScript. Okay, so just a weird quirk. I do have other videos on this topic. If you search my videos, just look up like React arrays or React objects or React equality. You'll find really long discussions and demonstrations of this. Okay. And then now you see how state works. So two things you need to kind of take away. If there's something in my component that's going to be state, meaning when it changes, my component should update physically, I have to create it using this useState function. Whatever I put in there is the initial value, and I get back an array with the variable and a function to change that variable. So that's why the syntax is going to look like this. Okay. But whenever I call that function, that is when my component updates, but it has to receive a new value. So for numbers, strings, and numbers, that's generally always going to work. But because it can compare 1 to 1 and be like, okay, 1's the same thing, but 2 and 1 are not the same thing. But when it comes to objects and arrays, you have to make sure you don't just change the content inside the object array. You need to give it a new array with the right set of values, or a new object with the right set of properties. Okay. Now I also mentioned the idea of a state and stateless component. So what if right now, the way we display this data is part of the component. So I cannot reuse this. Like basically all I can really use this is for specifically the counter. Okay. Now, if I wanted to make this a more reusable component, what I could do is I could write another component. So I'll go write another component, display, value with button, which will receive props. Okay, and we're going to assume that the props that we receive are going to be, so we're going to receive a value, so const value equals props.value, and we're going to receive a const button event, which is going to equal props.button event. Okay, so we have to make sure we send those two specific props over. Okay, and essentially what I can do is now take that out. I'll put null here for the time being. Okay, and then I can just change this, that it's going to display the value here. Okay, and then whenever you click the button, it's going to run whatever the button event prop is. Okay, and then this needs to be returned, so return. That should fix it. There we go. Okay, so now this component doesn't care what the function is, and it doesn't care what the value is. So I can use this to display any value with a button that does anything. Okay, so now what I can do is I can go over here and use display value with button, again as a component, so I got to use it like a HTML tag, like this. And then I can just pass it the right props, and needs a value prop, which should equal count.value. And it should take a button event, which should be a function, which is going to be our add1 function. Okay. And if you want to make this look a little bit nicer, what you can do is you can just hit enter here when you have the props, just to make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, so I can see I'm passing these two props, and now the button should be working again. So you see, I see the display, and ta-da, the button works. But the cool thing is now I can use this in other contexts as well. I don't have to use it just for the counter. Okay, I can now go over here, and let's say I wrap this in a div. Okay, let's pretend I have two counters. Okay. And just to show you something else that's important here, every time I use counter, each one has its own state. So that's the cool thing about this. I can use that same component over and over again, and each one has a life of its own. So when I click the first counter, so see that has a separate count than the second counter. Each of them have their own state. Okay, so that's one thing to point out. But again, I can also use that display component on its own. So I can say, hey, display value with button, give it an arbitrary value, like value equals click, and then we can give it an arbitrary function, button event equals, okay, let me just do this real quick just to make it a little bit easier to read, and then I'll write the function. So we'll say that the button event equals a function that all it does is alert you clicked. Okay, so now, again, nothing to do with the counter, but I'm using that same component again. So see there, it's displaying the value click, and then if I click it, I get an alert. It says you clicked. Okay, completely different behavior. Because this component is stateless, it allows me to reuse it in other contexts other than the counter. It's just going to depend on whatever I pass to it. The props determine sort of the context in which I use this component. Okay. And now the counter component is really just managing the state. It's just managing the state and give me the function to alter that state, which I then pass to whatever component I want to use it with. Okay, so that is, again, the whole idea of like stateless and non-stateless, like, because this may have stateful logic that's unique to my app. So this component is not what I'm going to reuse in future applications. It's just part of this app. But this component, I might want to take with me to other projects. I can reuse it because it has nothing that's specific to this particular application. The data that is specific to this application is being managed by this component, the stateful component. So again, just thinking through like separating the management of state in your components from the displaying of that data and doing them in two different components is a nice sort of habit to kind of get into, or something to think about when you create your components. Okay, but that is state. Again, state just means you can update the DOM whenever it changes. Okay, but yeah, And then again, you use the use state hook, and these are called hooks. Again, anytime you see the word use in front of something, it's called a hook, and allows us to create the state. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll talk more about more things. I'll see you there.